I thought about paying homage to silent movies by not speaking at all during this sponsor section of the podcast. Sponsor section of the podcast. Or perhaps during a part of the main body of the podcast itself. But then realized that would be stupid. It's an audio-only medium. I can't just air silence. Plus, if I acted like the great Stoneface and didn't utter a word, then I couldn't tell you about our sponsor. And I know what you're thinking. Commercials? I skip over those. Well, if you do that, then you'll miss me not only telling you about a great product, but you'll miss out on my somewhat sly references to the movie in question during the ad section. It's a thing I do. Okay, that's more true in episodes where the movie has actual spoken dialogue that I can quote. Well, bear with me. It's a new year, and I'm still punchy from the holidays. Doing this for a silent movie, trying to find references when there really aren't any when it comes to speaking. Actually, I'm recording this during the holidays, even before. I had some free time, wanted to get ahead. It's not even Christmas yet. Okay, stop stalling, dude, and tell us what you're selling. It's Sparkplug Coffee. This company has so many blends and roasts, including rotating seasonal blends, that your head might spin. Decaf and half-calf options are on the table, too, and the beans that you'll get are the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans. Arabica beans in Canada. You don't want to settle, so don't. Buster Keaton's characters often had to settle for less in his movies. Dude took a beating, physically and often emotionally. And look how bad the coffee they drink in this movie is. It makes him puke. Too bad he didn't have Sparkplug. A pile of puke. Anyway, this glorious post-Christmas gift is available to people who make their home in the United States or in our home and native land of Canada. You'll get your orders within a week, and we Canadianos won't even have to pay for shipping. But things get better than even that if you sign up for Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. Be a member and you'll get deals and also perks that a casual customer won't. And unlike those casual types, you members will save buckaroos on every order. And there's flexibility here. You can cancel or even just pause any time, since Sparkplug understands that sometimes you're out to sea and won't be anywhere near your porch or your mailbox for a little while. A long while. Would a constrictive Coffee of the Month Club offer you that? I don't think so. So navigate the Sparksters website, which is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Use our HYES promo code and you'll get a one-time 20% discount. All right, then I've sold you on the Java. Now I need to sell you on the Stoneface. Andrew, we enjoyed your Christmas theme back in December, but please strike up your keyboard and give us the other version, which you composed for us just over a year ago. And action. Have you ever seen The Navigator? Good day, movie monkeys and monkettes, and I thank you from someplace in my heart for downloading, or streaming, or stealing, or overhearing someone else listen to the 561st podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? This channel reviews classic motion pictures and spoils them every Monday and every other Friday. Hey, what do you know? It's an every other Friday. And since it's the end of the week, my wife Bev isn't here, so I'll be yapping at you all by myself. All by myself. And when I work this mic alone, I piece through the plot, throwing in many, many asides. And if you enjoy hearing a guy listen to the voices in his head and do impressions of famous folks during these extravaganzas, then I might satisfy you once or twice today. I said might. So let's set this thing up before we hear about the story. The Navigator was released by Metro-Goldwyn, not actually MGM per se. Louis Mayer and Marcus Lowe had founded MGM in April of this very year, 1924, but maybe that specific version of the company didn't make this film. Although for the record, Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr. came out that same year, and it was listed as just Metro. Anyway, whoever made this movie, it came out 100 years ago in mid-October 1924. It seems to have done quite all right at the box office. I read it was Keaton's biggest hit, although I'm not sure if they meant it was his biggest hit up to that point or of all time. Sherlock Jr. came out in May of that year, so 1924 was prime Buster, even though this project was better received than Sherlock Jr. was. Then again, his very best work came 3 years later when he made The General. That's, of course, his opus, his masterpiece. This is one of those select films that has a perfect rating on Rotten Tomatoes. 100% of critics suggest people see it. The average is 9 out of 10. There are only 22 reviews on the site, but the movie is 100 years old, so that's a pretty good sample for a movie that's that old. Anyway, 89% of audiences have lapped up the nav on Rotten Tomatoes as well. The National Film Registry thought so highly of this that they inducted The Navigator in 2018. 7 other flicks that we've covered went in with it. Broadcast News, Brokeback Mountain, Dun, 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 HUD, Jurassic Park, and My Fair Lady, Pick Up on South Street, and The Shining, with the other 7. This movie predated the Oscars, so it couldn't possibly have won any gold naked guys, but it was 81st on the American Film Institute's list of 100 greatest comedies of all time. Sherlock Jr. was 62nd, and The General was 18th. Of course, Buster K. almost always worked in comedy, and, well, really was action comedies. When Bev and I covered The General over 10 years ago, we talked about how it was almost the diehard of its day. And Keaton is up there with Jackie Chan and Tom Cruise as among the greatest stuntman actors in movie history. / they are stuntmen actors. In fact, he's more than just up there. He was at least as gutsy and skillful as they've been, and I wouldn't debate anyone who says he's numero uno. All right, those credentials didn't take me too long to get through, which is fitting for a 65-minute film. Let's kick things off and find out what Keaton and company did in The Navigator. We start off with some black on white title cards, which were clearly made not that long ago. They're flawless. NYX Channel has their brand on the cards, so that suggests that they remastered this film and wrote up these cards. Although I'm going to take issue with something they did a little later on. So it's spy versus spy as two enemy countries are at war. America has nothing to do with it, although I'm sure they still have their hand in there. The movie is set in America at the beginning, though, but it's not their war. But they can't be left out in the cold of things like this. World domination and all, even back then. The Navigator is a ship that the guys on one side of this conflict are planning to set adrift because their enemies just bought it. Maybe it'll hit some rocks and sink. Of course, they could just sink the ship right there, or, here's a thought, just steal it. Maybe they're just new at all this war stuff. Which already brings me to my movie in a nutshell, and in this case it truly misses the point of the movie, which was the original point of the nutshell. So The Navigator, in a nutshell, I wonder how that war turned out. Well, they wanted the Navigator to be disabled after crashing into some rocks, and they got their wish. Their rivals lost their boat. Mission accomplished. Here's an interesting way to introduce Frederick Vroom and Kathryn McGuire. Frederick Vroom, what a great name. You give them title card billing right here. It says he's the wealthy ship owner who has just sold the Navigator, Frederick Vroom, and she's his daughter, Kathryn McGuire. Vroom plays John O'Brien and Maggie plays Betsy, and Buster is their across-the-street neighbor, Rollo Treadway. Rollo Tomasi. It says that he's the sap of the Treadway family. I feel like I've heard Buster billed as a sap before. He made a film called The Sap Head in 1920, but I feel like he was actually named the Sap in something else, and I looked him up, but I didn't see any credits that just say The Sap. Anyway, when you hear that word, you gotta go right to John Goodman arguing about the high cost of urns with a funeral director in The Big Lebowski. Just because we're bereaved, that doesn't make us saps! This is our most modestly priced receptacle. Hey, it's black people. Well, for about 4 seconds. We'll get more of them later, not these ones, other black people, and you might not like their portrayal then. Rollo looks out from his bedroom window and notices the black couple in a car down on the street. They've just gotten married and are clearly in love, which prompts our man to announce to his butler that he's going to get married today, and then they'll sail for Honolulu. And I thought going for a hamburger at McDonald's before my night shift last week was impetuous, and it didn't even end up eating one. The line was too long. But unlike me, the Treadway boy has money. Money! So maybe his impetuousness will work out the way things so often work out for those with bucks in the bank. Although he also proves he's a knucklehead because he walks into his huge bathtub with his robe and jam still on. In fairness, I once got into the shower with my glasses on, and another time I dove into a lake with those same glasses still on my face, so maybe I'm also a sap! Glasses, by the way, disappeared to the bottom of the lake, never found them again. It's a good gag when Rollo gets in his fancy car and the driver just U-turns. Our man gets out and heads into the house directly across the street. I know people prefer to drive in LA, but wow. It's a good smile moment there, actually, and a fun comment about the frivolousness of the rich. The young Treadway just up and proposes to his neighbor, Betsy, that Betsy we just saw a second ago on the title card, and gets a prompt no. I proposed to my neighbor once, and her answer was a definite maybe. Definite maybe. I made that up. She didn't say maybe. Anyway, Rollo is so depressed that his woman won't accept his entirely sane suggestion that they get married out of nowhere, so he tells, it's even his woman, it's his neighbor, so he tells his driver that he needs to take a walk directly across the street back to his house. It's not like Keaton played a poor man as often as Chaplin played the tramp, but it's still a little odd seeing him be this rich and spoiled. But even though Rollo has no bride to go with him, he heads out for the honeymoon in Honolulu anyway. All alone. Alone, alone, alone. I bet you can't guess what ship Buster mistakenly ends up on. It's the name of the movie! But remember that plan to hijack the boat and set it adrift? Well, the agents involved in that dastardly war have captured the captain. I captured the captain. Who tells those, did not shoot the deputy, who tells those kidnapping SOBs that no one else is on board, even though Rollo is, unbeknownst to the cap. But Mr. O'Brien shows up with his daughter right then. He owns this boat, or did. Didn't he sell it? Didn't they say that? Anyway, he's immediately grabbed by the guys who like to grab people, and they tie him up. Betsy manages to get on board before the boat casts off, I think because she thinks her father is on the ship. So it's just her and the peacefully sleeping Mr. Treadway, as victims of this nefarious plot to waste a perfectly good boat in the name of a military squabble. Now that she needs him, though, Betsy is happy to find the dapper young Treadway is also on the boat. He hears her voice when she calls over help, so a comical chase ensues. We see in a wide shot that he just can't find her, and she just can't find him, until he falls down from a deck above hers and lands right beside her. While Buster Keaton was a great stuntman who did some truly death-defying things, this is a good example of him doing what he did most, and did best, fall down. Rollo asks her again if she'll marry him, but the answer is still no. Stractu! Well, of course she doesn't want to think about that when she's cold and hungry. Get her a sweater and a sandwich, and you'll be gold, Rollo, gold. Gold, Jerry, gold. Since they're both rich kids, they don't know much about how to cook for themselves, but they give it the old wealthy try. The two of them take a shot at making coffee, but there's no water. Fortunately, they're surrounded by water, and he just drops a bucket into the drink to snag some. I thought maybe you could drink seawater if you boil it first, although they don't do that here. I guess, well, then they're going to boil it by making coffee, aren't they? But I looked it up right before sitting down to record this, and nope, you can't. The salt is still there, so it's not potable. We'll come back to the water problems in a second. Rollo's next job after he dumps ocean into the coffee pot is to try to open up a thing of food, but it ain't happening. Hijinks ensue, and the container ends up flying across the room. And you can't eat hijinks. The rich kid continues to prove himself useless in the kitchen when he screws open a can of soup. Since he used a giant screw dealie, there's both a hole in the top now, but also on the bottom. Soup ends up pouring on the ground as he makes his way to the huge pot, and I do mean huge. 5 people could bathe in that thing. It's almost as big as his bath back home where he got in with the robe and the jammies. Rollbar doesn't go back and try to drill a hole into another can, but I guess we can assume he tried that later. This ship is pretty well stocked at least, so if he blows through a few cans, no matter. The eggs don't work out though either because we need comedy moments in this comedy. Sipping some of that terribly undrinkable coffee causes Rollo to run off and vomit off screen. Luckily, he's got the option of pouring a few pounds of sugar into the cup when he comes back to the table. So his drink will be plenty sweet, but it's still toxic. As a person with a coffee sponsorship as part of this podcast, these scenes were hard for me to watch. Let's bring this man into the modern day, if for no other reason than to get him some spark plug coffee. Hey, it's another ship. I believe maritime law demands these people help out our heroes in need, but Rollo continues to live down to his rep as a pointless rich sap. He's a sap! After he puts up a flag that indicates that the Navigator is in quarantine, which is why the other ship puts the pedal to the metal and motors off. What if Rollo and Betsy have COVID? Actually, since it was 1924 when they made this picture, the Spanish flu wasn't too far in everyone's past, so Keaton and his team might have had that on the brain when they devised this scene. We never see another ship come across them in what will turn out to be weeks that they're out at sea, although we can assume their quarantine flag is the reason no one ever helps them. Incidentally, it was Betsy who suggested he put that particular flag in the air, so they're both idiots. Although I wouldn't know it's a wrong flag either. I would be equally unprepared to handle myself in this situation, and I wouldn't stand a chance against what happens at the end of this movie either, the way that Rollo does, and Betsy too, but especially Rollo. Anyway, Rollo tries to catch up to the other boat by getting in the dinghy, although in the name of comedy, he must first fall into the water before he can start rowing. He's hooked his little skiff to the Navigator and thinks his mighty, mighty arms can row the boat he's in and a giant seagoing vessel, until his dinghy sinks. I didn't catch why that happened. Maybe I was looking down, taking a note. It just does. He scurries back to the ship, and Betsy tries to help by throwing him a life preserver, but that just conks him on the head. He gets pulled on board in a daze, but then she ends up down in the water. Rollo dives in after her and has to carry her up the ladder because she's passed out for some reason. He was just hit hard on the head by a life preserver and then made a dangerous dive into the water. Why are you unconscious, lady? We next get some tomfoolery with a deck chair. She's still out of it, so her body collapses to the ground, and then another chair collapses on our man. We get another title card, only this one is misspelled. It reads, by the time they were ready to say goodnight, they had found a couple of seagoing tuxedos. But night is spelled Nigth. That's a surprising blunder. You couldn't spell check this stuff? Again, these cards were made, obviously, a lot more recently than this movie would have been made, when they had no spell checkers. Well, except for human beings to spell check. Their tuxedos, by the way, well, that's just a figure of speech. These aren't something you'd wear to an award show. They're Navy uniforms. Buster's outfit is dark, while hers is the trademark white with a big black tie. I hate the whites. Everybody hates the whites. Betsy sees a portrait of the intense-looking captain, which is who this is supposedly supposed to be, but I originally thought it was a picture of her father. The internet says it was the captain. She wants to be rid of it, so she tries to throw it overboard. Somehow, though, it ends up getting caught on a hook on the hull of the boat and swings back and forth in front of Rollo's portal. So there's the stern man's face, perfectly framed whenever it passes by the window. The old dude glaring at him freaks out Rollo, so sleeping in his bunk is no longer an option. Well, he could just turn the other way, and that would be easy, or close his eyes. The man in this picture, incidentally, is Buster's co-director, Donald Crisp. This is his Hitchcock cameo. I guess Keaton's Hitchcock cameo is to just be in the movie. They think they found some candles, but they turn out to be Roman candles, which of course fire off in every direction once they're lit. It's a big hullabaloo. So they decide to sleep out on the deck instead. They play a foreboding record that freaks them out, so they're wide awake again. The ship is heaving, which makes them think it's haunted because doors are swinging open and closed on their own. It's a ghost goob, or a family of ghosts, accounting for all those doors swinging open. So the wannabe sailors head to the poop deck to try to sleep in chairs up there, but she almost flies overboard in a comical way, and Rollo gets slapped for getting fresh, even though he was only trying to save her from ending up on the drink. Poetic injustice. Their luck doesn't change and rain starts coming down hard, causing them to scramble for cover below deck. Water spills off their little navy hats and ends up covering the table, which means the playing cards he tries to fiddle with get soaked and ruined. So they lean against each other and fall asleep that way, sitting up at the table. They're like me. I can fall asleep almost anywhere, in almost any position. I just don't stay asleep for as long as I'd like. We learn that they drifted for weeks, and in the meantime have gotten themselves into a routine. They've even built some Rube Goldberg-type devices to help them make coffee and breakfast. Considering how much these two seem like they needed their servants to breathe for them, they've come a long way in just a few weeks. Survival breeds competence, I guess. Land ho! You'll have to forgive these 100-year-old characters for suspecting the black men on this island are cannibals. It's racist, of course, but we already know that he's a bit of a dumbass, and she's not the president of Mensa herself. Anyway, he thinks they'd be better off staying on the boat rather than go make nice with these strangers. The ship hits the bottom near the island and cracks open, taking on water. Rollo insists it's going to sink and then they'll be captured, but resourceful Betsy isn't going to give up that easily after she notices an old-timey diving suit hanging on the wall. This big fishbowl head is the Mysterio of its day. I'm talking about the Mysterio character from the Spider-Man comic books, not the lucha wrestler named Rey Mysterio. Booyaka, booyaka, 619. Booyaka, booyaka, Rey Mysterio. Bets helps Ro get suited up. Even though he didn't appear to be a smoker before now, he's smoking a cigarette just as she puts the helmet on, so he's breathing in nothing but tar and toxins. In the name of comedy. Okay, they get everything squared away, and he's ready to head down into the deep. Well, the shallow. It's not that deep at all. Rollo goes underwater without any sealed gloves on, so I don't know how water doesn't instantly get into that suit. But we've got the momentum of being in the endgame now, and there's also a gag later on that basically addresses this issue, so I won't dwell on it. I didn't laugh very often during this film, incidentally, a common refrain when we review these ancient comedies, but I love when he sets up a danger men at work sign underwater. That did make me laugh. This entire sequence has fun gags, actually, including him trying to dump water out of a bucket while he's underwater. Just like Sherlock Jr., the best sequences in all the Gutbusters seem to happen in the final 15 or 20 minutes. I read that these underwater scenes were difficult to film. They shot in a pool in Riverside, but they had trouble doing it that way and ended up filming in Lake Tahoe. Buster had to cut out an extended sequence under the sea, under the sea, under the sea, because it slowed the pace, which is interesting because he supposedly loved the way the scene turned out, and the movie is only 65 minutes as it is. There was time for a few more gags. Of course, even short movies can have their pace messed up by scenes that slow down the story. The natives get restless and they set out on their skiffs or canoes or whatever they are to see what's what with this Navigator boat. And while they're gearing up to investigate, a swordfish swims up and tickles Rollo's bum-bum. He grabs it and uses it to sword fight with another swordfish. Classic. But the natives start to climb aboard the boat while he's down there and Betsy is captured. Very King Kong-esque here. Obviously, King Kong came later, so it's Navigator-esque in King Kong. Obviously, Rollo is unaware since he can't hear a damn thing underwater. But then he is made aware that she's not doing her job to give these people air, because he starts to run out of that tasty oxygen. He stumbles into the path of an octopus, who grabs him by the throat and lets out a big plume of ink when they both go behind a rock. Maybe there's blood in that plume, too, because Rollo gets out of that predicament with his knife in his hand. We didn't see a stabbing, but I assume he turned Mr. Eight-Legs into calamari. Calamari. Not that I really love calamari. Just doing a homer. The natives eye Betsy while she's laying on the sand, who's probably realizing that this might quickly turn into a cannibal holocaust. But right then, Rolly Treads walks out of the ocean in his diving suit, freaking out the natives. It's a cool shot when he first surfaces. He does look like an alien or something. He makes a shaking off the water move like a dog might, and the islanders run away, run away, run away. Since he's still desperate for air, Betsy scampers over and helps him catch a breath. A great gag and one of the most famous images from this film is when McGuire uses Keaton as a raft. She grabs an oar and sits on his crotch, and paddles to the boat with him floating face up. I just realized this is why she's okay with kissing him later on. She likes sitting on his crotch. He's gasping for air again, but only gets some once she rows all the way back to the boat. Buster might not be a superhero, but his lungs sure are. Once they're safely back on the Navigator, the natives come back for more. But there's always room for comedy, and it's a good gag when Rollo starts climbing the ladder up to the next deck and topples over, which causes gallons of water to come rushing out of his suit and down onto the deck. They might be stereotypes, but they're determined stereotypes who almost get up on the deck, but Rollo manages to cut the rope holding up the ladder. The hungry black guys all fall back into the ocean, but reinforcements are quickly sent out by the ferocious chief, who's played by Noble Johnson. Roly-Poly uses those Roman candles he found earlier to fire at the men. That scares off a lot of them. To make sure to get some pratfalls in during the climax, Buster can't successfully chop a rope holding up a ladder the way he did just a few minutes earlier. First he hits the deck with the axe and misses the rope, then he misses everything and ends up doing a somersault while the axe goes flying behind him. Pretty classic vaudeville gag. And of course this guy originated in vaudeville with his family. The natives bring a coconut tree out with them during another wave of the attack and are going to use that to climb up to the boat, but all this does is provide Rollo with coconuts. He uses one to conquer a native who was almost face to face with him, then he throws some down at other guys in the boats. And then he pushes the tree off and sends it crashing hard down onto a boat. If that didn't murder one or two of the guys, and maybe even hurt one or two of the stuntmen in reality, I'd be a mite surprised. The attackers get to perform some impressive falling into water stunts during this climax. One guy backflops down into the water from the deck of the ship. It's like a trust fall where you plummet 20 or 30 feet straight back and you don't have somebody ready to catch you. But the natives outnumber Rollo and Betsy, so several of them finally do get on board. Our heroes get out while the getting is pretty good by rappelling down to the water and using a life preserver to stay afloat. Looks like they're doomed, though, as they sink underwater until Deus Ex Machina, a submarine that just happens to be in the area surfaces and brings them up with it. Why didn't the life preserver continue to float? They're led on board the sub while the natives converge and try to break in. The sub dives, so all the white people are safe, but that changes when Betsy kisses Rollo. He's so blown away by that peck that he falls back on the dive thing, that wand, that whatever it's called, and they all end up spinning around a few times. So yeah, we get one last absurd gag before the movie abruptly ends. It feels like there could have been a little more movie, but she kissed him and they're going home, so I guess it makes sense to end the story here. And I guess the Navigator now belongs to the so-called cannibals, finders keepers. It might not be seaworthy until it's repaired, but there's food and coffee and sugar and all kinds of other things on there. This is a win-win for these guys. So the cast. We reviewed Buster Keaton in The General way back in April 2013, which was the fourth movie we ever reviewed. He also had a cameo in Sunset Boulevard, just as himself. I often forget about that when I think about how little he's represented by the AFI on their, first list, obviously, he just had that cameo. Then the second list, it was The General and Sunset Boulevard. And when they got The General on the second list, it ranked 18th. Talk about making it up to him. So the best it was 101st the first time, and then 18th. I'm not complaining, I'm not criticizing, but that's something else. Of course, I yacked about Sherlock Jr. right around a year ago. So this makes 4 of his films on this channel now, but 3 starring him. Keaty Boy made other excellent comedies. Our Hospitality and Steamboat Bill Jr. are 2 of them. But the common tale is that talkies hurt his career. Which is funny because when you hear him talk, including during that cameo in Sunset Boulevard, very briefly, but pass, he has a perfectly fine voice, nice and deep. In the enduring Chaplin versus Keaton debate, I always say I prefer Chaplin. I just like City Lights, Modern Times, and especially The Gold Rush, more than I like Buster's best stuff. But those Keaton flicks I just mentioned are always a pleasure to queue up. That argument is like debating Babe Ruth versus Willie Mays. Both are on the shortlist for greatest ever. You can't go wrong. Buster K, of course, also directed and produced and edited this film. The IMDb doesn't list him as a writer, but Wikipedia does. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that he was the caterer and the script girl, too. The caterer. Kathryn McGuire was in a ton of shorts, but also played the girl in Sherlock Jr. At least she got a name in this one. McGuire was only in her mid-20s at the end of this decade, but she stopped making movies by then, only turning up to appear in a few TV shows at the end of the 50s. I think she's pretty good in this, actually. Frederick Vroom, 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 vroom. You know I had to do that. Went on to play a Southern general in The General and ended his career in 1939 playing Senator Payne's friend. That's his actual credit, Payne's friend, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The Senate's corrupt? What? How can this be? The IMDb only has 3 other actors listed, and they're all uncredited. Clarence Burton and H.N. Clugston play 2 of the spies, while Noble Johnson is the chief of the Islanders. Johnson was actually black. I didn't look close enough to determine if at least some of the other natives were white men in blackface, but the odds are good they did that in the 20s. Noble J was in over 140 movies, and I'm guessing he often played characters that people would frown on today, but at least he did get a lot of work. He even played the native chief in The Great King Kong 9 years later, like I said before. And as I recall, it's a similar role to this one, maybe even more savage and stereotypical. Their directors were, of course, Donald Crisp and Keaton himself. Buster was behind the bullhorn for 12 of his own starring vehicles between 1923 and 1929. Crisp directed a lot too, including quite a few short films, but he acted even more and won an Oscar nearly 20 years after this for Best Supporting Actor in John Ford's How Green Was My Valley. The answer? Fairly green. I guess the two guys didn't really gel all that well while making this motion picture, and apparently, Crisp wasn't even around when they filmed the underwater scenes. Crisp! I'm having a hard time saying crisp, crisply. The writers were Clyde Bruckman, Joseph Mitchell, and Jean Havez. Maybe it's Jean Havez. And maybe Keaton too, depending where you look. That same writing team worked on Sherlock Jr. that year, plus they did some jotting for plenty of the Busty One's other motion pictures. I wonder if they made the exact same movie today, if these dudes would be looking at Oscar nominations for their screenplay. It's hard to think of the best stuff in Keaton's flicks as written, but talk to a writer, and they'll always tell you that somebody wrote that great scene that you love. And Keaton's movies always have a lot of scenes that we love. The film is black and white, and it's in the old 1:33 to 1 Academy ratio. We haven't covered that many silent movies over the years, although 3 of them have been Keaton flicks. If I keep covering Buster every January, and I think I could make this a tradition, I guess the most logical one to do in 2025 will be Steamboat Bill Jr. There's that incredible scene where the wall of the house falls down during a storm, and he ends up not being crushed because of where he's standing. His body goes through an open window as the wall collapses to the ground. Crazy stunt, so dangerous, but also so classic. I love this remastered print, which was digitally restored a few years ago. The Antonio Coppola score does feel way too modern, though. I guess they did a score in 1969 because they've got on the IMDb Claude Bowling, uncredited, and Robert Israel in 1995, and then William Axt, just uncredited period. So I guess they've had different scores over the years, but this one is more modern. Very modern, a couple years ago. Of course, back in the teens and 20s, silent movies would be accompanied by someone playing a piano live in the theater. That or there would be no sound at all, or sound effects, and there are a few of those in this film. Just like I said a year ago when I covered Sherlock Jr., that even though I didn't LOL that much, I truly had a good time watching Buster do his thing, and I always do. I definitely smiled a bunch. Let me repeat a phrase you've heard a lot on this channel, especially lately. Comedy doesn't usually age very well. It's either offensive or it's just not that funny. And what does age well? This was such a different era. Nobody would likely do these booga booga scenes with the black men if they shot the movie today, for one thing. Okay, Peter Jackson did when he remade King Kong, but even that was nearly 20 years ago. As for McGuire and Keaton, they have chemistry and neither of them really mugs for the camera the way so many silent actors did. Minimalism was always Buster's acting style. So yeah, I prefer the general, but this is a good movie. And in the era we're in now, where every movie seems to be 2 hours and 20 minutes long, it's nice to sit down to watch a film that tells a complete story, but barely lasts an hour. And that was how I saw The Navigator. In 2 weeks I'll be back at it in monologue mode. What will I be covering? I don't know for sure. I'm recording this episode way in advance this time. It's still not even Christmas as I lay down this track. I want to talk about Little Caesar on January 26th because I need to know if this is the end of Rico. If I can't snag the DVD somewhere or find it online or on TCM, then I might take advantage of some of the ones I've recorded off TCM in recent months. Or maybe I'll choose the Dudley Moore comedy, Arthur, which is on Canopy. In any case, I'll pick something pretty good that I think you movie fans will enjoy. And if I don't do Little Caesar later this month, at some point this year, I really do intend to find out if this is the end of him. In 3 days, Bev will be here again, and we'll get back to reviewing films that she's eager to discuss. This is, after all, the month of Bev. While you wait for us to post another show, you can spend some time writing to us. We continue to be members on Elon Musk's doomed app. Our TweetX handles are @MovieFiend51 and @BevEllisEllis. You can also email us. HaveYouEverSeenPodcast@gmail.com is the address. We've been posting our shows on YouTube for a little over a year now. Look for @HYES Ellis or toss Have You Ever Seen into the search bar on the Tubaroo. Rate us there or on your app. Write a review, comment, subscribe. Do whatever people do to support the shows they like, or to roast the shows they don't. And one more time, I'll let you know about that 20% discount you can get from Sparkplug Coffee when you use our HYES promo code. The place to go is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. So that's that. Thanks for devoting some of your precious, precious time listening to me. See you on Monday. But in the meantime, I'm going to go down to the docks and get on the wrong boat. Maybe I'll end up on an abandoned freighter for a few weeks, where I will drink seawater and battle some violent strangers. Or maybe I'll just share what's on my boat and see if these guys have a telephone somewhere handy. And cut.